NASA finally has a new administrator after many months of back and forths. The MAVEN spacecraft may be in a worse state than we thought. A near miss between a Chinese satellite and a Starlink satellite opens new debates about orbital traffic management. And South Korea wants a ride to Mars on Starship. All that and more coming up this week in Spaceflight. One of NASA's robotic Mars explorers isn't doing so well. Last week, we covered how the agency lost contact with its MAVEN satellite at the Red Planet, and this week, the situation seems even worse. So what happened? Well, as the satellite orbits Mars, its trajectory sometimes takes it behind the planet from our point of view, leaving NASA unable to contact it. That's not unusual, but earlier this month, MAVEN didn't phone home after it reappeared into view. Engineers immediately got to work to re-establish contact, but so far they've been unsuccessful. But we did get some extra information. The agency received its last bit of spacecraft telemetry through its deep space network on December 4th, but 2 days later, it picked up another fragment of signal. Analysis of that signal points to two things. First, the spacecraft seems to be spinning in a way that it isn't supposed to, and second, the signal's frequency suggests that MAVEN's orbit has changed. And to be honest, neither of these are good signs. So what's at stake here? Well, MAVEN, short for Mars Atmosphere and Volatile Evolution, arrived at Mars in late 2014 to study the red planet's upper atmosphere. Mars currently doesn't have much of an atmosphere. It's only about 1% as thick as Earth's, but at one time, it was believed to have had one thick enough to support liquid water on the surface. How exactly the planet lost its atmosphere has been puzzling scientists for a long time, but MAVEN's study of the planet's upper atmosphere has finally started to answer this question. Just this year, scientists first observed a process called atmospheric sputtering, all thanks to MAVEN's instruments. Atmospheric sputtering happens when solar wind bombards the planet's atmosphere, knocking particles into space. With discoveries like these, MAVEN has given the scientific community a few of the first puzzle pieces to figure out how Mars lost most of its atmosphere, as well as its oceans, but it's only the beginning. Another mission to study how solar wind and the Martian atmosphere interact is already on its way. It's NASA's ESCAPADE mission, which launched on New Glenn just a few weeks ago. The two ESCAPADE spacecraft are now awaiting the next Mars transfer window in space, which will set them up for arrival at the Red Planet in 2027. ESCAPADE isn't a full MAVEN replacement by any means, though, especially since MAVEN is also part of NASA's Mars Relay Network, made up of 5 NASA and European Space Agency missions doing double duty as a communications relay for the planet's robotic inhabitants. The small ESCAPADE satellites aren't equipped for this function. With MAVEN now out of commission, NASA teams have had to adjust planning for the Perseverance and Curiosity rovers to make do with fewer communications opportunities, while also trying to reallocate time on the network's other satellites. Wouldn't it be nice to have some satellites dedicated to this capability? If only someone was working on it. Well, we've seen proposals for a Mars telecommunications orbiter from the likes of Blue Origin and Rocket Lab after the US Congress approved $700 million for it this summer, but those are still proposals and won't be ready for action for at least a few years. For now, we can only hope that NASA manages to recover MAVEN. Teams are working hard trying to re-establish contact using the Deep Space Network. If they manage to talk to the spacecraft again, they'll have to figure out what happened and how to recover. NASA has been able to rescue spacecraft from dire situations before, but it's by no means guaranteed. Hopefully, they'll manage another success with this one, and we are keeping our fingers crossed. After several months of back and forth, Jared Isaacman has finally been named the 15th administrator of NASA. After being re-nominated again on November 4th, Jared was probably already familiar with the procedure that would lead to his confirmation, but this time the schedules were a lot more compressed. During the first round, his nomination was made official on the day of President Trump's inauguration, January 20th. But his nomination hearing at the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation didn't happen until April 9th. This time around, it took less than a month, with the nomination sent to the Senate on November 6th and the hearing taking place on December 3rd. So, like 2 episodes ago of This Week in Spaceflight. And as we reported last week, with the Senate hearing completed, Jared's nomination was voted on at the committee level just less than a week later on December 8th. Now, compare that to the 3 weeks that were between the hearing during the first round and the subsequent committee vote. Definitely a much more compressed schedule this time around. Of course, what didn't happen the first time around was the vote of Isaacman's nomination in the full Senate, but that too was also made faster for this re-nomination. During the first round, Jared's nomination was supposed to be voted on at the full Senate around the first week of June, or about 5 weeks after the vote at the committee level. It never happened because his nomination was dropped right at the end of May, but it was planned to have occurred just mere days after that cancellation if it hadn't happened. You get the point. In this case, the time in between the votes at the committee and at the Senate was just 9 days, with the Senate voting favorably for Jared to be NASA administrator on a 67-30 vote. With the successful confirmation in the Senate, Jared Isaacman was then sworn in as the 15th NASA administrator. While this was a rather long process, it still took a lot less time than with Jim Bridenstine, for example. He wasn't confirmed until 15 months after President Trump's first inauguration. At least NASA now has a leader, and for the moment, he seems to have ample support across multiple areas of the spaceflight industry, from NASA contractors to former astronauts and avid space enthusiasts as well. While Jared has gone to space twice and can pilot several different spacecraft, it's already safe to say that politics and bureaucracy will be a whole new challenge for him. While there was a lot of support for him as the nominee, support for the policies presented on the president's fiscal year 2026 budget proposal didn't have as much support, at least those related to science or the closure of certain NASA centers. Now, that didn't end up happening in its entirety because Congress legislated against a lot of those cuts and in fact intends to fund NASA at similar levels as previous fiscal years. But that just means that the Trump administration may once again try to pass those cuts in the next budget. And by then, it'll be Jared who will have to battle with Congress about the budget and convince them that the administration's plan for NASA is good and that there's sound reasoning behind it. He'll also now be NASA administrator for the upcoming launch of Artemis II, which, if there are no more delays, should happen in February. And if NASA's plan to accelerate Artemis III goes well, he'll also be the administrator during that mission. Large programs like Artemis and flagship missions like NASA's Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope or Dragonfly really benefit from stable, consistent leadership rather than major decisions happening during the tenure of an acting administrator. So we wish him the best, and we also wish the best for NASA in the next coming years. Blue Origin is preparing to kickstart its lunar exploration program with the launch of the first mission of its Blue Moon Mk1 lunar lander next year. In preparation for this mission, the company has been methodically putting together all of the components that make up the lander, from its main tank body structure and the guidance and navigation software to, of course, the engine. This week, Blue shared a video on social media of the firing of the BE-7 engine that will power that first mission. The post stated that the engine underwent two 290-second tests, during which the engine went through the entire range of thrust and mixture ratios that it can run with. Blue CEO Dave Limp stated that the engine can be throttled down to 20% of its maximum thrust, and the different mixture ratios allows them to optimize the performance of the engine for the different phases of the mission. With the acceptance testing now complete, the engine will be shipped to Florida for integration with the Blue Moon Mk1 lander. As for the lander itself, it was supposed to have headed to NASA's Johnson Space Center to undergo thermal vacuum chamber tests by now, but we still don't have any official word on that yet. That testing will be critical to ensure that the lander is fully ready for launch, and Blue really wants to launch it early next year. So if there's been no such testing yet, it may lead to delays in the schedule. But the testing and preparations for Blue's lunar exploration goals don't just end with that mission. The company has a contract with NASA to land astronauts on the lunar surface with its Blue Moon Mk2 lander on Artemis V. While there could be a chance that this changes based on recent moves to accelerate the Artemis III landing, they're still working on the Mk2 lander and training for human missions with it. This week, the company shared news and a picture of human training at the Active Response Gravity Offload System, also known as ARGOS, at NASA's JSC. According to Blue, the company had undergone a series of tests at the Neutral Buoyancy Lab, which we did an amazing tour of a few months ago, by the way, so you should definitely check that out. And apparently, during that round of testing, they'd been given some feedback by the crews on what needed to be changed. So with that feedback in place, they've changed their hardware and have now tested the improvements at Argos. This testing rig is really convenient because it simulates lunar gravity without needing to have the crew inside of the pool all over again. Blue says that the testing performed at Argos tested the improvements under more challenging conditions by simulating multiple landing angles based on uneven lunar terrain. This testing is really important as it also helps to establish operations and procedures for the different kinds of scenarios that might occur during these lunar exploration missions. In recent episodes, we've covered some of the major steps that different Chinese companies are taking to achieve rocket reuse. Sometimes these designs are likened to Falcon 9. People in the comments often yell that it's all just a copy, and, well, we could argue about the technicalities of that all day long, but we're not going to do that here. That said, there are companies in China that are, yes, not only inspired by American rocket designs, but they also confirm right away that they're even trying to copy the same systems. And that's the case with Astronaut this week, a company that's rather young and has for the past year been designing a clone of Starship, even down to the rocket's Mk1 system. I don't even need new earrings for it. In a post released this past week, the company announced that it had carried out several tests with their own version of this system, although as can be seen in their media, it doesn't seem like it's attached to any tower, just the arms by themselves. This isn't the first company in China to have tried mimicking SpaceX Mk1 system. Most recently, we saw, for example, Cosmoleap trying out something similar, although those of you who have an expert eye on Starship's Mk1 system will notice that Cosmoleap's design had a bit more originality than the one from Astronaut. The rocket that'll be using this technology, which they call AS-1, will technically not be a full clone of Starship, but rather more like a mix of Falcon 9 with Starship technology. However, there is another young company trying to copy Starship. It's not the only one. The company has the very long name of Beijing Leading Rocket Technology, and they're planning to launch the Xingzhou-1 rocket, which literally means Starship 1. Yeah, it's even named like SpaceX's rocket, just with a 1 next to it. The rocket is intended to be fully reusable, and the company claims to have developed a, quote, intelligent grid recovery system and fully reusable AI rocket technology roadmap. The rocket will be caught for landing, but instead of doing it via arms, it'd be through a series of wires, a concept which we've seen from other companies as well. While the rocket looks like a copy of Starship, its size and performance will be nowhere near that of a real thing. According to the company, they plan for it to be able to lift 3.5 metric tons to sun-synchronous orbit, so it'd be more like Stokes Nova rocket in terms of performance than Starship. That said, every time one of these proposals comes out, it's kind of amusing, and it makes us wonder, like, come on guys, seriously? And another intersection of Chinese spaceflight and SpaceX's operations happened in orbit this week, and it could have had a much worse outcome than just copying some designs. Back on December 10th, a Kinetica 1 rocket launched a rideshare mission with 9 different satellites from China's Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center. Well, just 2 days later, one of the satellites came within 200 meters of a Starlink satellite that was in its operational 560-kilometer altitude orbit. In particular, the Starlink satellite was number 6079. SpaceX's Vice President of Starlink Engineering, Michael Nichols, went on X to point out this event, calling for better coordination between satellite operators. Typically, after a launch, the Space Delta 18, also known as the National Space Intelligence Center, is the United States center in charge of tracking objects in orbit. But sometimes, when several satellites are launched at the same time, it can take a bit to correctly track and determine their orbits, and also identify which is which. That means that in a case like this, SpaceX knew that a launch had happened, but didn't know where the satellites were until several hours later, which then translated into one of those satellites coming really close to a Starlink satellite. Now, 200 meters is no joke in space. Average relative speeds between objects in low Earth orbit are normally on the order of 7 to 8 kilometers per second. That means that 200 meters is under 30 milliseconds of difference between hitting each other or just safely passing one another without a collision. It turns out that the launch provider for the Chinese launch, CAS Space, is also on X, and they responded to Nichols' post. Following a few hours of investigation, the company stated that since this incident had occurred after the launch, it was no longer their responsibility, and therefore it was a satellite operator responsibility. What both CAS Space and Nichols did agree on is that there's definitely gonna have to be better collaboration and communications between satellite operators to prevent incidents like this from happening altogether. As our NSF livestream intro says, we don't need any more of these. Now we'll take a look at some other stories across space, starting with a milestone for an upcoming moon mission. Firefly has completed structure qualification testing for its second Blue Ghost mission. The first mission made headlines back in March when it became the first fully successful commercial mission to land on our celestial companion. With the upcoming second mission, Firefly plans to add a whole new component, its Elytra dark space tug, which will carry the lander between Earth orbit and the Moon. It's capable of hosting 2 payloads, so it'll also give a lift to the European Space Agency's Lunar Pathfinder satellite. What's more, once in lunar orbit, Elytra will act as a communications relay for Blue Ghost. All stacked, Elytra Dark with Blue Ghost on top measures 22 feet, or about 6.7 meters, and this will be the first time Firefly launches this structure. To ensure that it'll make it into space safely, the company worked together with NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab to test a structural model. After stacking the model, they subjected it to vibration and acoustic testing. With these results, Firefly can now work on getting the real hardware ready for flight. One of the payloads for Blue Ghost, NASA's Lucy Night Radio Telescope, is now ready for testing. The mission is set to lift off on a Falcon 9 in late 2026, so we'll hopefully see more parts for this mission coming together soon. South Korea wants to launch a mission to Mars on Starship. Yes, the Korea Aerospace Administration, also known as KASA, is planning an ambitious science exploration roadmap which includes sending payloads to Mars on SpaceX's Starship rocket. KASA has recently released a series of goals and milestones that it's attempting to achieve for the future of its space science. These include introducing upgrades to its Nuri launch vehicle to eventually send payloads on their own to the Moon and Mars. However, the rocket will still be too small to launch large missions to the Red Planet, at least in the near future. So as part of their release this week, KASA announced it's in talks to send a 500-kilogram payload to the Martian surface on board SpaceX's Starship during the 2031 Mars window. This would make it the second government space agency to book science missions to the Red Planet on SpaceX's Starship, with the Italian Space Agency having done so back in August. SpaceX advertises these opportunities on their website as being priced at $100 million per metric ton, so that would be about 100 times cheaper than the current price tag, based on how much it cost NASA to develop, build, and launch the 1-ton Curiosity and Perseverance rovers. It definitely seems that a reduction in price like that would make it more appealing for smaller governments to try out their own exploration of Mars. Last month, we reported on damage to a launch pad's critical service structures after the launch of the Soyuz MS-28 spacecraft to the International Space Station. Soon after that happened, it seemed like finding a new replacement for this service structure, or repairing the existing one, would take quite a bit of work and time. But this week, the Russian space agency, Roscosmos, announced that work has already started to bring Site 316 back into operation by the end of February of 2026. According to the release this week, the agency had a complete replacement kit delivered to the Baikonur Cosmodrome, allowing for repair work to commence. Currently, a lot of the work seems to be split into 2 groups. The first consisting of workers at the pad removing some of the hardware to make room for the service cabin to be installed, and a second working on priming and painting the cabin components before they're installed at the pad. All in all, Roscosmos says that 18 heavy-duty vehicles and over 130 employees are working on this to accomplish it on schedule. If that's true, then only the launch of the Progress MS-33 spacecraft, originally planned for mid-December, will be affected by this incident. Let's just hope it doesn't happen again, and good on Roscosmos for having spare parts for a service cabin. Isar Aerospace is getting ever closer to launching the second flight of its Spectrum rocket. In late March, the rocket took off from the German company's launch complex at Andøya in Norway for its first mission. But if you remember, the rocket didn't get as far as they'd hoped, as it lost control shortly after liftoff. The company has now implemented the lessons learned from that flight into the rocket for Spectrum's second mission, which recently arrived at Andøya. This week, Isar shared a video of its second stage static fire test, during which the stage lit its engine on the pad. According to Isar, this stage features a performance upgrade as a result of the company streamlining the vehicle's design and reducing complexity. With this successful 30-second test, the stage is now ready for action during Flight 2, which might be soon. According to the latest airspace restrictions, the launch period is scheduled between January 13th and January 24th, so there's a lot to look forward to next year.
This is your weekly space traffic report provided by Next Spaceflight. And what's already becoming a tradition, this week was once again jam-packed with 10 launches in 7 days. 4 of these launches were Starlink missions, 2 taking place from Vandenberg and the other 2 from Florida. With these 4 launches added to SpaceX's tally, the company reached its revised goal of 165 launches in 2025. According to Vice President of Launch Kiko Donchev, In the summer, the company had revised the goal from 170 down to 165 launches based on, quote, business and manifest needs. He also stated that the launch from LC-39A was going to be the last one with Falcon 9 for a while, as SpaceX focuses on upcoming Falcon Heavy missions in 2026 and developing the Starship infrastructure at the Cape. China also had 2 launches this week, the first one carrying the 5th DEAR recoverable spacecraft. DEAR, which stands for Discovery Exploration Advanced Recovery, is a spacecraft built and developed by AZ Space. It consists of a small pressurized capsule attached to a service module for on-orbit maneuvering. The capsule can carry experiments that can be recovered once the capsule returns back to Earth, which usually happens several months after the launch. The second Chinese launch of the week carried the Ziyuan 304 high-resolution civil survey satellite. Rocket Lab launched 2 times this week as well, with the first mission happening from New Zealand on the Raise and Shine mission. The launch was carrying the RAISE-4 spacecraft for the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency into sun-synchronous orbit. It's the 4th in a series of demonstration satellites carrying several experimental technologies and materials testing. The previous one, RAISE-3, was launched on a Japanese Epsilon rocket, but it was destroyed during the launcher's failure during the mission. As a result of several delays trying to fix the Epsilon rocket, JAXA decided to instead launch the RAISE-4 spacecraft on Rocket Lab's Electron rocket. The second Electron launch of the week took place from here in the United States from the Wallops Flight Facility in Virginia. NSF was there covering the launch live, which carried 4 DiskSats into orbit for the US Space Force's Space Systems Command. The name of the mission, Don't Be Such a Square, is a play on words with the fact that most small satellites these days are, well, in fact, CubeSats, which have square faces, unlike the ones flying on this mission, which are flat-packed. And as a pun enjoyer myself, I really love this mission name. The flat-pack design of DiskSats aims to reduce the amount of volume taken up by small satellites inside a rocket's payload fairing, thus allowing more of them to be loaded without compromising on the satellite's capabilities. Or, in other words, a similar approach to SpaceX's own Starlink satellites. This week, we also had the launch of an Atlas V from Florida, carrying a batch of Amazon LEO satellites into orbit, bringing the total operational LEO satellites up to 180. And from French Guiana, an Ariane 6 launched a pair of European Galileo global navigation satellites into medium Earth orbit. This was the first of such launches on Ariane 6, following 2 previous pairs that had to be launched on SpaceX's Falcon 9 due to Ariane 6's development delays. To wrap up the year, we have quite a great deal of launches. Ironically, SpaceX will only launch twice in what remains of the year, with one of the launches being a Starlink mission from Florida, and the other one carrying the 3rd Cosmos SkyMed satellite into orbit for the Italian Space Agency. Rocket Lab is also looking at adding at least an extra Electron launch this weekend from New Zealand, although details about the mission haven't really come out yet. 2 Soyuz rockets are also expected to launch from Russia in the next couple of weeks, one from Plesetsk and another one from Vostokny. India is planning to launch AST Space Mobile's first Bluebird Block 2 satellite on board a Launch Vehicle Mark III rocket during the last week of the year. And, possibly while we were editing this report, the South Korean company Innospace may have already debuted their hand-built nano rocket from Brazil. Whether it did or not, we will cover that in the new year. From China, we'll have a handful more launches as well to close out 2025. Perhaps finally including the debut launch of the Series 2 rocket and the Changzheng 12A. As we always say, we recommend you visit nextspaceflight.com or download the Next Spaceflight app on your phone so you can keep track of when these spaceflight events may happen.
And that's your weekly update of spaceflight news. We'll be taking a short break during the holidays, but we'll see you all again in the new year with more episodes recapping this week in spaceflight.